This morning we're going to discuss the Homeland Security cost of the catastrophic withdrawal, as I mentioned, which resulted in the unfortunate deaths of 13 U.S. service members and at least 170 Afghans in an ISIS-K orchestrated terrorist attack. It also resulted in thousands of extremist inmates, including many with ISIS and al-Qaeda ties, who were released by the Taliban from Pfluger prison, as well as the Parwan detention facility in Afghanistan. Last Congress, I introduced a bill to make sure that there is an assessment of terrorist threats posed by those prisoners, 5,000 plus that were released from those two facilities by the Taliban. And the legislation became law in a bipartisan effort, and it was included in the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2022. And unfortunately, to date, we have yet to receive an assessment from the administration on the threat that those released prisoners pose to the United States, our homeland, and to our allies. You know, this hearing is actually important to me for a couple of reasons. Number one, personally, because I've served in the Middle East. I have friends that have served, colleagues who have served, members of this committee, this subcommittee have served, and many of you as witnesses have served. We understand that the threat in the formation of these ideological and often very violent extremist groups is something that, if left unchecked, will continue to metastasize and get worse. Less than 2 weeks ago, the administration released a report that I believe whitewashed and shamelessly shift-blamed about the execution of deadly withdrawal from Afghanistan in a very inaccurate form. The administration's continuous denial and downplaying of what happened is an insult to the service members sitting here and throughout the United States of America, to their families, and to our allies. It's inaccurate to say and to suggest that the withdrawal occurred without chaos, as was suggested by a spokesman for the administration. One doesn't have to see the horrific images or footage of the evacuation for more than a couple of minutes to make a keen observation that there was a lot of chaos and desperation involved. And unfortunately, the disastrous withdrawal signaled American weakness and damaged our credibility on the world stage. There is no doubt that our foreign adversaries, including Russia and China and others, were watching and that they were calculating. And it's important to remember that, you know, the genesis of our involvement in Afghanistan came as a result of the first and only Article 5 ever triggered through our NATO membership. And that was the attack on our homeland on September 11th, 2001. And now there are 31 members of NATO, with Finland joining as of last week, who look at the results of this withdrawal, and it impacts not just our own homeland and not just our own security, but also that of our allies in Europe, as well as those in the Indo-Pacific, such as Korea and Japan, who had a lot of skin in the game throughout the 20 years. But further troubling is the fact that this administration has repeated the same mistakes we made 20 years ago. And now, with our inability to collect intelligence on the ground, to project power, terror groups within Afghanistan have reestablished the country as a breeding ground and a safe haven for terrorism. Just recently, CENTCOM Commander General Kurilla stated that ISIS-K is rapidly developing the ability to conduct external operations in Europe and Asia and will be able to attack American and Western interests outside the country in less than 6 months. In addition, last month, this subcommittee held a hearing that examined how the Chinese Communist Party is working to exploit our vulnerabilities, including the CCP surveillance balloon, which collected information on sensitive military installations and critical infrastructure here in our homeland. The CCP's use of intellectual property theft, economic coercion, and malign influence at American universities continues to accelerate. I look forward to this subcommittee's work, to coming together in a bipartisan way to look at the facts and to understand what we can do better. And while we were rightly focused on those issues, we must never lose sight of the threats posed by terrorist organizations who are emboldened to carry out and inspire attacks against not only the United States of America, but our Western target allies. I worry that the terrorist threat landscape is not just worse, but much worse since the botched withdrawal. And as I have said before, we see a direct link between the foreign terrorist threat abroad and our security here at home. For instance, let us not forget an Iraqi man, Shihab Ahmed Shihab, who was charged with aiding and abetting a plot to murder former President George W. Bush. Shihab was an ISIS sympathizer inspired to action by Islamic extremist propaganda. In another matter which affected my home state of Texas, a British citizen, Malik Fazil Akram, entered the United States using the visa waiver program and then held members of the congregation Beth Israel, a Jewish synagogue in North Texas, hostage for 10 hours. These are just a couple of examples of cases that highlight the very real foreign threat that terrorism poses to our homeland. Another concern that I've continually raised is the significant increase we've seen in watch-listed individuals being encountered at the border, in particular the number which are being apprehended between ports of entry, meaning that they are not presenting themselves to be processed at the port of entry, but instead attempting to evade law enforcement. This comes at a time in which we have an unprecedented crisis at the southern border as a direct result of Secretary Mayorkas's failure to enforce the laws that are currently standing on our books. It has been revealed by the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General that DHS encountered obstacles to screen, vet, and inspect all evacuees during the crisis following the withdrawal from Afghanistan. On top of that, the Pentagon's watchdog published a report which detailed its critical review of the administration's effort to screen, vet, and transport those evacuees to the United States. This subcommittee and the Greater Committee on Homeland Security intend to thoroughly examine these issues to ensure that those charged with protecting our security are acting responsibly and using their resources to properly engage the threats posed to the homeland. We must work together to protect our homeland. This committee, the Committee on Homeland Security, was formed in the wake of September 11th, 2001. It was formed directly as a result of the withdrawal that we will now be investigating and discussing today. We have to remain vigilant. We have to continue to view strength as a peace through strength and security as a peace through strength mentality. I was recently abroad and met with the Polish Prime Minister, and he said this: "I desire peace. That is why I prepare for war." Nobody wants war, but we desire peace. We have to secure our homeland, and I think that the Prime Minister is absolutely correct. Again, thank you to all our witnesses. Thank you for your time and your expertise. I look forward to a good discussion to look at a fact-based analysis of what happened and how we can protect the defense and the security of the United States. With that, I will yield to the ranking member